Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Villanova. I'm Shay Rhodes. I am the director and the co-founder of the CSE Institute. I can't believe how packed this room is already. This is amazing. I want to introduce to you both of the attorneys who work in our Justice for Victims Fellowship, Sarah Robinson and Jamie Peasy. And I also, the curtsy, it's everything. I also want everyone to know that I have amazing students who, if I didn't have them on board with the CSE Institute, there is no way we could accomplish the things that we do. So I'm going to ask them all, this is why I have you dressed like grown-ups and not pajama people, stand up. If any of you need anything at all during this conference, please feel free to grab any one of them. They are my right hands and left hands and feet too. I could not do this without you guys, so thank you so much. Seriously, if any of you need anything, please grab one of them and they will help with anything that you need. So again, welcome to Villanova and welcome to, I can't believe this, our third annual Survivor-Symposium. This is really unbelievable. When we came up and sort of dreamed up this concept, there is no way on earth that I could have envisioned that it would turn into an annual event, that we would have so many returning survivors who I am grateful for just having these relationships. They help me be a better lawyer all day, every day. And that every single year we have new voices and new faces to add. I'm just thrilled with the lineup that we have and all of the different workshops. I wish that I could go to every single one of them, but this year we're really great. We're filming them all. So if there is something that you can't attend and you want to see, we will be making them available later on our website. I could not have pulled this event off this year without the wonderful and gracious Ron Stanko. Ron, where are you? Come on, stand up, Ron. And we just had such tremendous support with community stakeholders, and the Governor's Office of Homeland Security has just been our partner throughout all of this. And Ron, we are truly grateful for your support and your leadership on this issue. I also want to give a shout out to Robin Oster, who's standing there in the back. Hi, Robin. She's the brains behind this operation, along with Kathy Welsh, and just seamlessly, makes this event just tremendous. And I just couldn't do it without you, Robin. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I could stand up here all morning and just rattle off thanks, but I would be really remiss without saying thank you to Carol Landis, who is here in the room. Without her generous support, Jamie and Sarah wouldn't have jobs. So thank you. Thank you for believing in our vision and for supporting the work that we do, Carol. I'm so grateful. We really are. So I just want to give all of you who are here for the first time a little bit of history of the CSE Institute and why this symposium came to be. Again, I'm just really overwhelmed that this is the third year we've done this. My co-founder, Professor Dempsey, is actually doing her day job. She's teaching today. She'll be here this evening. Michelle and I came up with the concept of doing a day-long sort of conference on commercial sexual exploitation. And one of the things that's incredibly important to us is ensuring that survivors not only are part of the conversation, have seats at the table, and contribute from their professional perspectives, which are really, informed by their lived experiences, right? So when we did this day, we had a survivor on every single panel, including our law enforcement panel. And at the end of the day, it was a survivor leadership panel, and it was we had 5 survivors on the panel. I believe all of them are here today. And they each had 15 minutes to talk, and then we had 15 minutes for a question and answer session. And at the end of it, when Michelle and I were going through all of our evaluations, we realized that no one had enough time not to have their questions answered, not to talk, not to engage, not to network. And truly the best teachers for all of us in this movement are the survivors. And I learn something new from a survivor every single day. I believe that because of the relationships that we've built at the CSE Institute, we are better lawyers, and we are sending future lawyers out into the world better informed and more equipped to do a good job. So from that day-long conference, this concept of having survivors design and lead the workshops was born. And I don't like to say no to anyone. I like to give everyone an opportunity. But at this point, we get so many applications. It's truly unbelievable. So if anybody wants to fund me to make this 3 days, I would be grateful. Ron, that's out there for you. But I know that we have so many workshops, and at the end of tomorrow, we'll do sort of that wrap-up and feedback session with cards that you'll all get tomorrow with questions. And last year, at the end of the symposium, during the questions and answers, there were so many wonderful questions asked. So many survivors wanted an opportunity to weigh in more and engage. And so I thought, why not begin this year's symposium with where we left off last year? So with that, I would love for my 4 panelists to come up. Unfortunately, Autumn Burris can't be here with us this morning. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that she gets on an airplane and flies here from Colorado today. Not sure how that's going to happen.
It's a blizzard.
Yeah, it's a blizzard. So we have 4 panelists with us this morning. So if I could ask the 4 of you to come up, and we'll just start. We've got Christine Stark, Audrey Morrissey, Elisa Bernard, and Vignita Carter. Oh, that'll happen. Do you guys need waters or anything? Audrey, do you need water? Vignita, do you need water?
Shay, that line down, the blinds go down,
Sure. Hey, Sarah. Could we just, I don't see any staff in the room, if we could just get somebody to pull the blinds down to the glare. I think they're automated and I don't want to push buttons. Oh, can I shut that? Yeah. Oh no, I'm not pushing that. Hey Molly, how do I turn that light off up there? Yeah. It's a great question.
The red shiny button.
Yeah, no, I don't push buttons. I've learned the hard way that's like not a good idea. So while we're getting all the sort of technical things squared away, I could stand up here and introduce to you the panelists, but I think that I wouldn't do them justice. And I'm gonna just ask everyone on the panel, and I guess we could start at the far end with you, Elisa, if you could just introduce yourselves to everyone. Talk about the work that you do, what your current position is, how you became involved not only in survivor leadership, but the global movement of ending commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking. And what does your day-to-day work involve? And then all of you are going to have to answer that same question. Thanks, Robin. Yep.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a big run-on question.
Okay.
Right.
I am a lawyer. If I were in court, I would get an objection from the other side, and they would say objection, compound question. The lawyers in the room, right? Yeah. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you here? How's that? That's 3 questions. Who are you? Sure. Why are you here?
Yeah.
And what do you do?
I can do that one. Why are what? Who are what?
Hi guys, so my name is Elisa Bernard and I am with I'm the Director of Education and Partnerships for the Organization for Prostitution Survivors in Seattle. My day-to-day work involves a lot of different things. I do work kind of from the development side through to the education side. I run a 12-week webinar series that I designed, mentoring series for survivors that has been taken by survivors across the country. Some of them are in the room today. Hi, Megan. So that's a lot of the work that I've done. I've been on a number of task forces and coalitions and work groups around this topic that have focused both on services as well as demand reduction, which I think you guys will hear a lot about later today. And yeah, that's the thing. And I love Shay. That's why I'm here, is I love Shay. And she asked me to come every year, and I always say yes. And honestly, this is one of my favorite conferences that we do every year. This is the one that I'm always like, I need to be there. Not only are some amazingly astounding women going to be speaking to you today that I am honored to call my sisters, but this is when it is our chance to really have this conversation with you that we don't normally get to have because we're usually on the other side of this table. So it's very nice to actually be able to kind of bring that dialogue into this. So.
Good morning. I'm such a morning person. Most of you are like, good morning. I become you around 6:30, 7 p.m. My name is Audrey Morrissey, and I am the Associate Director and National Survivor Leadership Director of My Life, My Choice. My Life, My Choice is located in Boston, Massachusetts, and we do a few things. First of all, to kind of back it up, another survivor years ago when My Life, My Choice started, I kind of came aboard. Her and I had been on the streets of Boston together, and when My Life, My Choice first started, I kind of came on board just as someone who just shared their story, that exploitive stuff we used to do years ago in the movement. But at that time, I don't feel that it was exploitive. I think at that time it was needed for folks to hear what we had been through so that they can really have an understanding of the fact that we were not volunteers, we were victims, and that this was something that was done to us and it wasn't something that we chose to do. So when I look back on that at that time, that's what was needed to do. But to fast forward it, I came aboard, and then I was hired to train on commercial sexual exploitation of children, which is one of the things that we do at My Life, My Choice. We also have a 10-week prevention curriculum in which which is used in 30 states in the U.S. And that prevention is gender specific for girls or trans identified girls. And my workshop will be talking about what that looks like and the need for survivors to step up and do more prevention work. I know for me, I think about, our mentoring program, which is what I founded at My Life, My Choice in 2004, where we pair adult women with adolescent youth for a one-on-one relationship. I personally would like to mentor less youth and work harder at preventing them from being exploited. And so that's a piece of what we do as well. We train across the country on using our group. So anyone in this room really who works with adolescent youth can be trained on how to run our 10-week prevention group. So we believe that no one has the right to buy or sell people. And we really feel strongly about children being bought and sold. So that's what we really work and fight for, the children. And unlike those of us in this room, people kind of look at, if I mention that this happens in the US, they really, but it's a huge issue. And we fight for our children that are being exploited right here in the United States, and we work even harder at reaching girls across the country to prevent them from becoming victims of commercial sexual exploitation.
I don't know if that's what you asked me, Shay.
Of course it is. Literally, you guys can say whatever you want. All good, it's all you.
Good morning. My name is, Benita Carter, and I got into this movement back in 1989. And I got involved just because of my own history. Many moons ago, I got involved in the stripping industry. And it was through that industry that I saw lots of things happen. I'm from Minnesota, and stripping came into Minnesota in 1972. And it wasn't really that big a thing back then. It wasn't really well known. But I got involved because I had just graduated high school, me and a girlfriend. We thought we could make $1,000 a week, like it said. We were getting ready to go to college. And we thought it was dancing because they said dancers needed, and one thing after another happened. It was far from dancing. There was a lot of things that happened. I never went to college when I wanted to, but excuse me, but I did learn a lot of things about that industry. I realized how women and girls were so, I'm going to say brutally in some ways exploited. And so come 1989, I went for an interview on a job that worked with women who had been involved in systems of prostitution. And I got the position, and I took the position, and I was a program director. This agency closed in about 1996, and I did not want to quit the work because there was so much happening, you know, in this industry all over Minnesota, all over the nation, really. And so I began an agency called Breaking Free, and it was a survivor-led agency. I hired survivors to do the majority of all the work. It was one of the first agencies of its kind in the nation. My goal was to provide housing, permanent housing for women, because I realized that that was one thing that was missing. Whisper had became like a, I'm going to say, recycling kind of agency, because the ladies would come in, but they had no place to go. They had criminal records, so nobody wanted to rent to them. And I said, we've got to do something here. We have to, you know, kind of fill that gap. We have to provide housing, that it doesn't matter what her criminal record is, and mainly her record was just housing, prostitution. And I'm like, well, she's not really doing anything. Somebody's doing something to her in prostitution. But people didn't really understand that concept at this time. So we were able to get kind of I'll say a dilapidate, really trashy kind of building, and I hate to say that, but we fixed it up, and we had some volunteers to help us fix it up. And so we had 13 apartments that we prepared for women and their children. So what we saw happen out of that was women were able to get their kids back out of child protection. They were able to heal. They were not rushed out in a year or 2 years. They were able to take their time, get their head straight. After you've been involved in prostitution, you just don't get healed the next day or the next week. Sometimes it takes years to heal from that. So women could stay there as long as they wanted. We began to see women go back to school or go to school, get their high school degrees, get college degrees. So HUD heard about us. And so would you be interested in applying for some HUD housing? Now that's a big thing, government housing.
Yeah, it's huge.
And so right now Breaking Free has 3 buildings, 38 units that they take women and children in. And every year they try to grow it as much as they can because there's such a need. And the list is so long for women that are waiting to be housed. So we did other things. We did a lot of education and training. And I want to say I call myself being semi-retired right now because I've been in this for a long time, and I thought, okay, what? You know, I said semi-retired because really you can't never leave this. There's just always something happening. And so basically right now what I'm doing is a lot of training, a lot of going around and just still educating people. Hey, this is violence, because it seems like we're kind of going backwards in some ways right now. There was a time between like 98 and I'm going to say about 2007 or 8, people seem to really be getting the message about prostitution being violence, and that it does hurt women and girls, and that little girls don't grow up about, you know, daydreaming about becoming prostituted women when they grow up. And then some things started to happen. You know what I mean? And we started kind of going, I'm going to say backwards again, because we had some other people who believe it's a free choice, and that if she chooses it, and I won't get into all that, but it got pretty deep, and there's some things that are happening now that are flipping everything. And I feel like in many ways that we're having to go backward, and we're having to start training people all over again and helping them to understand why this exists, the truth of the impact that it has on the lives of women and girls. So basically, right now that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Well, Benita, I'm really grateful you're only semi-retired. So thank you for being here. Wow.
Yes.
You can't ever retire. I'm gonna lie.
Okay.
Chris, you're up.
Yeah, so my name is Chris Stark. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. And I'm also from Minnesota, and I'm actually facilitating art groups at Breaking Free right now, which we started doing back in the early 2000s, kind of off and on. I move a lot, so I come back and disappear. And I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I guess my title would be grassroots organizer and writer. I've been virtually unpaid for 30 years doing this work. Yeah, so that's another perspective that we don't hear about a lot. And I was used in family intergenerational trafficking ring, which was quite organized in the state of Minnesota back in starting in the 70s. And this is something that I think Shay wants to have us talk about a little bit more too, is that there's a narrative in the media around what prostitution and trafficking consists of, and that's one of the ways, or one of the quote-unquote stories of how it works. But I escaped that situation when I was about 19 years old, and I went to college. So, and played soccer in the Big Ten, and drank and smoked a lot of pot, and played soccer and got really good grades. So when I quit drinking, I stayed in my room and cried for an entire week. And then the shit hit the fan for me personally, because as soon as I stopped doing these things that kept me going, I just like bottomed out, and my past just totally overwhelmed me. And like what Vanita was saying, this is something that you're quote unquote healing from, and you're dealing with for the rest of your life. When you have that level of trauma that women and children experience in this a system of exploitation, you're always dealing with it. And you learn to manage it and remanage it and so forth, but it's always there, and you're always on that journey of self-discovery, which hopefully whatever you've been through, you're always on a journey of self-discovery, right? It's just a little more intense when you've been traumatized. So when I was about 21 years old, I was part of an organization at the University of Wisconsin that brought Andrea Dworkin in to speak. And I would go and stand up at Take Back the Night rallies and other things around Madison, and I would say who I was and what I'd been through, and I would name the perpetrators in part because I didn't want to disappear. And I really, at that point, had the expectation that I had this tremendous amount of knowledge, which all of the survivors in this room and elsewhere carry a tremendous amount of knowledge and intelligence that we should be respected for and honored and put into positions where we are sitting at the table along with everyone else, not as tokens. Well, I had this expectation that people were going to be like, oh my God, well, let's rally together and get the other women and children who are being abused like this out. What do you know? How can we work together? It's not exactly how things have unfolded over the past 30 years, right? But one of the things that I took from that in those early days of organizing around this, before it was really in the media, and kind of cutting my teeth on a friendship and a closeness with Andrea Dworkin over the years until she passed, was the unbelievable amount of respect that she and some of the others doing the work in the early years with, Vanita and I had for survivors. Respect the way that Shay treats survivors, the way that some other allies treat survivors. Just absolute respect. I never sat down and talked to Andrea or these other women doing the work in the early years and felt like I was, pardon me, mentally retarded. Sorry to say that, but I feel that way, sometimes. That's the way that we're sometimes treated, where we end up feeling like we're like disabled or something, and you have to, explain everything to us because we don't have the capacity to understand what we've been through, we don't have the capacity to strategize, to organize, to end this. And it is the exact opposite of what this was in the early years, when Andrea would say, if you want to end prostitution, put survivors in charge, they'll end it. And you know, I just really want to honor that and remember that, because I know that I have had to draw on that plenty of times over the past 20 years or so, when this work has changed so dramatically. There's some good things to come out of it, but like Vanita said, we need to put this back into a place where survivors are believed, heard, honored, respected, paid, and put into positions where our knowledge and our intelligence and our creativity and our unbelievable strength is at the forefront of this work. So I just want to thank you for being here and being part of this.
You know, Audrey, you said that in the early years, when you guys were getting started, how sharing the story was exploitive, but needed. And you and I had this conversation a lot recently about how we get phone calls daily, multiple times, or emails daily. Do you have a survivor to come and speak at our fundraiser? We want to open a house, or you know, we're trying to raise money. And I always respond to, well, what honorarium are you willing to pay survivors? And lots of times I'm met with, what do you mean? I can't imagine. I mean, I've said this kind of off the cuff and funny, but like, do you have bills, Audrey?
Oh, you know, as you were saying that, I was like, wow, it would have been nice if, you know, once we were identified that came with a home, all bills paid, our children's college tuition paid. And I don't know why folks think we don't have the same bills as what I like to call earthlings. I don't understand that. I know I have a daughter who just graduated from BU and was in like $100,000 debt. So I think one of the things that's real important, if anyone in this room didn't know that, hopefully I was helpful in helping you to understand that we do not live for free. It would have been nice. Now, if all of that came with being a survivor, I'd probably be more than grateful and willing to volunteer and share what happened to me all over the country if all my bills were paid. But the bottom line is that you've heard from these women who I look up to. Vanita Carter is definitely a woman that I look up to and I admire, who was there from the beginning. I mean, who has really, I mean, it's, you know, women like these two women who have fought the fight. And it's so funny, you know, when you were speaking, you know, there was a piece of me that was like, okay, I'm glad this white woman is telling these people this. They might not listen to me, right? And with that said, that leads me into also the importance of allies. And Shay, who is a fabulous ally, who has like booked me solid for the day. Anyone else, I'd be like, are you, I don't want to talk all day. But I understand that she is a woman who believes in me, and that she is a woman who believes in what I do. And for me, someone who, again, helps to lift my esteem and reminds me that the work that we do is worth it. And I always have to say this, I do believe that survivors should lead the way, but the other piece is having allies, you know, because people would say to my boss, you pay her? And of course, Lisa Goldblatt-Grace, who is a fabulous ally, and our leader at My Life, My Choice, who believes in survivor leadership all throughout. I believe, I know that we're really up there as far as the employment of many survivors. and we keep hiring, like we keep hiring. So again, Shay, we can do it, but at the same time we need folks like you to tell the other earthlings that we have bills and that we have to be paid. I mean, and I'll say this, that those of us at this table have been around long enough. I remember I was afraid to ask. Well, now I'll tell you what I charge, right? But that comes with practice. And the last thing that I want to say, I think that a lot of times when folks ask people, I notice that people who claim to be allies or I want to start a program, they usually won't come to women like us. They'll target newer women who don't have a clue, who think that their only worth is to tell their story. And I remember being in that place, and I'll tell you something, the newer the survivor is, the more harm you're causing her, and the more exploitive it is. You know, for myself, I'm like, oh God, I'm an old chick, I don't really care, you know. No, but I've done some work, you know what I'm saying, to where I can kind of do that. But to take advantage of newer survivors and making them believe that their worth in the movement is to come tell their stories. If you are asking women who have been out of life 6 months, a year, 2 years to tell their story at an event, I'll just say shame on you.
It's interesting, Audrey, you know, I can't ever take my lawyer hat off, right? And I'm always really concerned with, number one, is the survivor going to be paid for his or her time, mostly her time? Number two, is she going to get a 1099? Does she have a contract? What's in that contract? She's going to have to pay taxes. Does she have a bank account yet? They're so, I'm going to, yeah, you want me to tee this up for you, Elisa? Yeah. But the other thing that really concerns me, and I witness this every single time I'm at any type of event, whether it be at a law school or a conference or just a speaking engagement, you know, in a hall, where a survivor does stand up and share some pieces of her story, which involve regurgitating a crime that happened to her. I was a prosecutor for 10 years. I did that for a living, asking people to retell the crime that happened to them. And I don't think in this movement, I think it's relevant to a degree, but not to an exploitive purpose. My point is, one thing that really troubles me is when allies are so impacted and moved by things that they hear, they approach a survivor at the end of the talk and say, I need to hug you. And I always tell survivors, you're not an animal at the petting zoo. You don't have to be touched if you don't want to. So I just hope that we can all be mindful of, like, you know, that interpersonal space, but also, like, there are consequences to paying people things. Are you 1099ing them? Are you ensuring that they have a letter saying what they were paid for? Those types of things. Elisa, you want to take this one?
Yeah. 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 TV right up. Yeah, I think my experience in this movement, I started doing this work about, 6 years ago now. And one of the things I was noticing was, here, Elisa, would you please come and speak at this function, make us all sorts of hundreds of thousands of dollars because you're going to make people cry and quote unquote, you know, elicit emotion from the crowd, and tell your story, which, you know, I was only in the life a few years, but I have been telling my story for more years now than I was in the life. Yeah, it's when you start thinking about that, isn't it? So it's one of those things where you start this kind of like, these people come to you, oh yes, do this. And I remember one of the first very large speaking engagements that I had was a fundraiser for another organization that was funding the organization I worked for, but also funded other organizations. So my story was being told to support many organizations doing work in this movement, but also outside of this movement. Some of that work I didn't actually agree with. And my payment was a massage gift card for $400. That fundraiser raised over $800,000 for that organization and other organizations. And it was very quick.
Wait, Elisa, they didn't offer you a job?
No.
You didn't have a paycheck?
Nope.
You didn't have health insurance?
Nope.
Okay.
So it's one of those, the realities of the situation is like Audrey said, we have bills. we have these lives that are just like your lives. I think one of the most impactful questions that we got last year
Wait,
was,
can I ask it?
go for it.
What do you do for fun?
And my response to that was, what do you do for fun? Because we're humans, just like you. We live and breathe and go to school and go to work and have jobs and get colds, which I'm just getting over, and have water leaking in our house and we need to figure out how to pay that. We need all of these things that you have, except we're also doing it with massively compounded trauma in our lives, which means that those little things are just that much harder. And then when you get to the end of the year, when April comes around, yay, this time of year, and it's tax time, and I have nothing but 1099s, and I have no W-2s. That's actually not true now. I do have an amazing organization that I work with and for that employs survivors and fair pay, and this is quite literally the first time in my 6 years of work and in this movement getting paid a living wage. This was literally last month was the first time in 6 years, actually over 6 years, that I was able to pay all of my bills. So the understanding that we cannot be taking advantage of survivors in this way, I cannot impart that enough to you, because, can you live on that? Can you live off of a massage gift card? I mean, it'd be nice. I would love that. But it's not helpful in the long run. And truthfully, it's kind of devaluing our stories, it's devaluing our lives and our lived experiences. When my lived experience is worth a $400 gift card to some massage parlor that's in an area of town that I don't normally go to and I can't even get to without bus tokens, how are you helping me? So I want to invite you all as allies. Everybody knows I'm a little prickly.
I know that.
When Shay was talking about the hugs, we were actually having a conversation that Shay and I are a little prickly together, and we're like, when we hug, it's like two cacti hugging. So it's a little prickly. But it's the reality is I can't live on hugs. And we need more than that. And we're worth more than that. Our lives, our experience, our professionalism, it's worth way more than that.
Benita, when you started Breaking Free and you were hiring survivors, did that even occur to you? That you were creating something that was survivor-led, right?
It really didn't when I first started. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. When I first started Breaking Free, I really wasn't thinking of it like that. I just knew that there were a lot of survivors that I knew that had gotten out of the life like I had, a while ago. But we didn't start just hiring lots of people either. It was just me and one volunteer survivor for about the first year. And we just started by doing groups, and eventually we started to get some money. And we started hiring survivors in, but I'll tell you that we went through a lot of backlash over hiring survivors. Breaking Free did. We were, law enforcement was coming down on us. Everybody was coming down on us. You got all those criminals in there working for you. They're in there working with delicate, issues and people. And so I was constantly under the gun from outside agencies on the staff that was hired at Breaking Free because they were all survivors. And I just kept saying, I knew Breaking Free was doing excellent work. We were able to meet them women in places that other agencies that have been around for a long time, PhDs, I'm not coming down on all that. You know what I mean? Social workers were not able to reach the women, but the survivors were able to do it. And we were seeing lives change because of that. But it was not an easy thing to do. It was not easy.
And I just want to add too that it's still pushed back on, and the more professionalized that this has become, the fewer survivor-led programs. They don't get the funding.
That's right.
You're in a house, that is not in great shape, while those organizations that are funded by the Minnesota Department of Health or whatever are in these sprawling, brand new, multi-million-dollar complexes. And this is really a huge issue that we have to talk about, and it's not just like, we're like, you know what, we want you to respect us. I mean, well, we do, but you know, this is about, the reason we're saying this is because it translates into who gets helped and who doesn't get helped, right? I mean, that's the point of us sitting here, is that there are women, you know, in Minneapolis right now who are being, you know, raped for 4 hours with a meat cleaver.
Yeah.
And nothing is happening for them because there's a massive split between how the programming is now structured with this professionalization versus the survivor-led programs who are connected and who have this information. And if we had some kind of power, we could actually change and stop this. So we have got to have these conversations. We have to come together. This isn't a like, we're putting on our boxing gloves because we want to fight with anybody. This is a like desperation call, right? Because we're out. I could go do something else. I you know, have taught for 16 years at a university and community college. I could go do something else. But you know, this is about the women who are there. This is about the women and children who are there, and the love and connection that we have with them as survivors, and the desire to help them, because we were them. We were them with no one helping us, and we were them in that desperation, right? And so, you know, I just really want to, you know, really we have to come together because lives are depending on it.
Chris, you're Native. And you are not sort of that, what you, I'm going to use your words, what is portrayed in the media of who a survivor of sex trafficking is right now, right? Someone who's been sold on the internet. How does that, or does it, compound what you've seen shifting in the movement over the last 30 years? That was a super compound question. You know what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm white and Native, and I, you know, follow Anishinaabe ways, and the work that I'm doing now is almost entirely in the Native community, so I think that I'm not. I mean, on a personal level, I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Kind of, not on a personal level, but like both, right? Professionally, your voice being heard. Questions that you're asked when you do sit on panels, and how you've seen sort of the media portraying what, I mean, all of us read about it if you get the Google alerts on trafficking every day.
Yeah.
Like, is that challenging for you? Do you feel like you have one more hurdle to overcome?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think that you know, not obviously looking white, so I pass as white. I have all sorts of white privilege, obviously. There's a lot of Native folks who don't look, you know, stereotypically Native, and I think that the way that I kind of want to talk about that is to say that the stuff that has come out recently in the last few years with the professionalization of this, which, you know, has some good things with it, is that those kids that we're now hearing about from police forces and other authorities, those 2-year-olds who are being sexually assaulted and used in pornography, and the infants, and, you know, the 5-year-olds and so forth, that's been going on for a long time. That's what I'm a survivor of. I mean, I was born into this stuff, and I was groomed in it, and these are very organized, networked predators. And I know survivors who are in their 60s, 70s, and even in their 80s who were using those things in this country. And so pulling that forward and connecting it with the image that is put out there, which is largely constructed on racism, right? And pulling that forward so that we can have a complete understanding and a complete picture of who's being hurt and how it's being done, therefore what we can do in order to end that, is really crucial. And I have found it to be very difficult to bring forward this information because people don't want to hear it, they don't want to believe it, they want to stay with this, you know, image that they have in their mind. I mean, these two can talk about this way better than I can, but, you know, you go back in the history of slavery, and there's reasons why we have a construction and we have law enforcement that largely focuses on going after African American men as perpetrators of this. When we look at the actual history of this country, and then probably going away out, she's like, shut up, Chris.
No, Chris.
We look at the history of this country, and the first trafficker was Christopher Columbus. And we look at the history of this country, and when the European men came over, prostitution or trafficking, whatever we want to call it, was institutionalized immediately, even before the 13 colonies were set up. This has been here since the very first days of colonization. And I think that bringing forward this information and bringing forward that reality, again, is not just like an exercise in futility or like, we want to browbeat someone, but because this is the foundation. The foundation of prostitution and trafficking is colonization, it's white supremacy, and if we don't understand that, we can't really fully deal with this issue. And so challenging those all of the time, both professionally and personally, we all have to be engaged in that.
I think all of you have touched on, and again, those of us that have been in the movement for about a decade or a little less, and then Vanita, you and Chris, who've been in the movement for 30 years, how have you seen not only the changes in the movement? I mean, Vanita, you touched on this. Like, we were making great progress in the early 90s, and then there seems to be right now a backslide. What are the changes not only that you've seen in the movement, and how would you like to counter them, sort of that backslide, right? Does that make sense?
I think the changes I've seen, like I was saying, is I've seen a lot of people begin to, I'm going to say, to think about our begin to think maybe this should be a choice, is what I'm saying. They're thinking that maybe there's a big movement, pro-prostitution movement going on, and they got some big voices too. And there's a lot of women out there, a lot of people, I'll say, that are saying that this should be a choice. You know what I mean? And there are politicians that are rethinking this. Should this be legal? And should we decriminalize this? What's happening? And people that I know that I have spoken with in past years are beginning to rethink where they stand on this issue, is what I'm saying. There's politicians that are beginning to rethink. Maybe we need to make some other decisions or some other choices pertaining to this. Is this a woman's right? I mean, this is what I've been seeing here within the last, I'm going to say, probably 8 years. Are these kind of decisions that people are beginning to really challenge if this should be a woman's right. And and it's like I say, all the work that has been put in over the years on really educating people and letting them know the impact of this. Again, it brings me back to slavery, because I really do think prostitution is an extension of slavery. And I always say that during slavery times, excuse me, I've got a cold and I got allergies, so I'm being attacked here. But wow. What was happening back in the slavery days is that when the slaves were being free, there were some slaves who did say that they didn't think freedom was, that they didn't really want to be free. They thought that they were in a big house, they had some privilege in there. They didn't undergo a lot of the things that the field slaves, I'm going to say, went through. Right. And I look at prostitution like that. You have some women that might be working, and what I'm going to say, the big house might be the Hilton Hotel, some of these big hotels, meeting these very wealthy tricks, Johns, that they're seeing on a daily basis. And they say that they're not being hurt, that this is not harming them. But you have thousands and thousands of women who are not in them hotels, who are being in the alleys, on the streets, in drug houses, being forced, thousands of them that are being literally, obviously hurt. And they're saying this hurts us. I always say that during slavery, it didn't matter what the house slaves said, because the slaves were free in 1865. So it didn't matter that I say that handful of slaves who said that they thought they had it better in the house. It didn't matter what they said, the slaves were still free. We have to look at the majority of the people that are saying prostitution is violence and it hurts me. You know what I mean? And we have to go on and do what we need to do for those, regardless of what this other group is saying. If it hurts one, it hurts all of us.
Right.
It makes a statement about everybody, you know, so.
Right. I mean, in the waves of the feminist movement, and Chris, you could speak better to this than I ever could because I'm not a feminist scholar. I wish Michelle were here right now because she actually is. But there are two things that we hear all the time. Oh, prostitution, it's the oldest profession. Or, you know, prostitution, it's a victimless crime. And we can all say that, we've all heard it, I believe, because the patriarchy has it as part of their propaganda campaign.
Yes.
And so within the waves of feminism and the sexual revolution, women now have agency over their bodies and to choose sex or not choose sex. But what I can't understand, and I wrestle with this all of the time, especially working in academia, is why on earth would I want to sort of fit into that box of, well, it's inevitable because it's just inevitable and that's the way it is. So I'm going to try to capitalize on this patriarchal institution of entitlement to sex, including purchasing it. And I wrestle with this all of the time because if we truly want equality, that's not equality. I want to burn down that box, right? That the patriarchy's tried to put people in, including prostituted women. Chris, you want to talk about that a little bit? Because you've been studying this for way long time.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's interesting because I know that the way that this work has sort of evolved now is that there's a lot of talk about like best practices and like all these research and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you know, it's so boring that I can almost barely stay awake in any of these conferences, other than this one.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. Do you need me to get you a
And if
pillow?
anyone's talking about best practices, I'll do that. It's so like, you know, just sort of dry and like lacking in, I don't know, any kind of verb or anything. And it's like when I was little, I was like really aware when I was 4 years old that I might not wake up in the morning. I mean, I knew that when I was 4 and I would fall asleep, I would feel really sad, like deeply grief-stricken that I might not wake up. And, you know, freedom is what I grew up wanting. Like I grew up wanting freedom. I grew up thinking about freedom and being free of this. And so I'm sort of the polar opposite of what, you know, Shay and Vanita, you know, just talked about here. So I can't understand that like in my heart, but I feel like I can understand that that there are it's a human condition that when you oppress a group of people, there are going to be at least some of those people who are going to accept that their place in the world, and they're going to look at how they can capitalize on that. You know, I don't think there's any institution of oppression where we would find people who do not respond to that. It's just a state of being a human being in this world. And I don't, you know, if someone is looking at that in that way, I don't really, I guess, take issue with them, and I don't really concern myself with that because, like what Vanita is saying and what Shay is saying, is that there are so many thousands of women and kids out there who want to get out and who need those barriers removed. So I think that it's extremely unfortunate that there are some vocal women, you know, who go around and say this. And I also have seen and observed and witnessed this on more than one occasion, where these women are grappling with their own dehumanization as a woman. Perhaps, you know, they have other oppressions in their life as well. And this is the way I think that surviving this stuff, that what it does to your psyche and to your mind and to your heart is like a pinball machine, right? And it's like doing, and the ball goes all over the place, and you're not really always sure where it's going to go. And the way that I look at it is that for these women who are very vocal about this, that when they were traumatized, that pinball sort of bounced around in a bunch of places to where it ended up that where they think that they're going to get their power back, and it's like an aborted attempt at healing themselves. That's the way I look at it. And that pinball machine, or that little pinball, went all over the place. My ball did not bounce those places. I was very clear at a very young age what was going on, you know, in that sense of like I was being destroyed, I was being annihilated, and I wanted to get away and be free.
Right.
But if somebody else went through that same thing and their ball bounced around a little bit, you know, I just I take issue with the structure and those who are really benefiting from it. I'm sad and sometimes angry at those folks, but I really have seen over and over and over and over again that this is an aborted attempt for them to find some kind of power in the world for themselves, and an aborted attempt at actually trying to heal the trauma that they have experienced.
And can I just add to that? I always think of looking at these women after they come out of the life. I feel like, you know, I was manipulated into the life, but for a lot of years, you know, I was that woman who, like, the pimp was gone and I'm doing my own thing. But I have to tell you, after coming out of the life, the trauma, meaning I'd like to see a study on their sexual health after coming out of the life. I don't know about them, but for me, that destroyed the biggest thing for me is the ability, I mean, I'm just going to be blunt about it, the ability to have sex and be present.
Intimate relationships.
Right. And to be present, I remember when I got clean 26 years ago, and I remember, and at this point, I'm not into, like, I was victimized, you know, I'm like, okay, you're a dope fiend, blah, 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 that sort of thing. And I remember my first attempt at having sex, and I left the building. And I remember early on thinking, oh, maybe you needed drugs. When you were high, you would do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? I thought it came from substance abuse, like lack of drugs was the reason. It was not until I began doing this work and I started hearing things like dissociative disorder, right? And I began to look at, and this is, you know, when I began doing this work, I had been in recovery about 8 years. And again, I kept thinking it was, you don't have drugs. It wasn't until I began doing this work that I realized I suffered from dissociative disorder, which plays out during sex more than any other part of my life. What I mean by that is I developed a skill, right? Because I couldn't sleep with strangers and be present, and it wasn't an enjoyable, I do this now because I love having sex with strangers, right?
Right.
It was the worst part of it, and what I got in touch with is that I practiced disassociating during sex for from 16 to 30, that now, right now today at 56, it's gone. Let me just say that is the biggest trauma that has affected me. I do not know how to be present and have sex. I still have to say, wait a minute, you gotta connect the two. You're in a moment, like you just left, come back.
Right.
That is the biggest trauma that I've suffered, which affects relationships, intimate relationships that I've had. So I say that to say, those women aren't going around saying, I do this because the best part of it is I love having sex with strangers. That is the worst part. What they like you said, some form of twisted power that they think they have, and more importantly, money. You do not hear them say, I do it because I just love having sex with a bunch of men I don't know. And I don't care how much they're paying. It is. So for me, I'm always saying I always want to put up the money to study them after they come out of the life so that they can really see the effects. Because I didn't see it until actually years after I left the life. But they're not coming out of that unscathed, believe me.
Yeah, I think that dissociation is such a huge issue, and I feel like it's also something that we really need to talk about a lot more. Can you hear me? Oh.
Nope. I'm gonna pass the other mic.
No,
Yeah.
It's on. It's on. Green light.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because dissociation is such an integral piece of surviving incest, domestic violence, prostitution, trafficking. You know, and I think part of the issue, you know, is that people are like, well, how could somebody actually survive something like that through childhood? Well, because you dissociate, you compartmentalize it, you know, create personas or whatever, however you want to talk about that. And I also just want to kind of put another spin to this, is that my Wa'a, which is like in Anishinaabe ways, it's like a godfather. I brought up dissociation to him, and he leaned forward and he's like, what are they talking about now?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I said to him and he said, that's a gift. He said that's a gift that people are given. And I also just really want to put that out there, because there are other ways of viewing everything in the world besides this white, you know, dominant culture way. And he was like, you know, that's a gift. People who have that, they've been gifted. And you know, I just want to put that out there. And I have some books that I've written about dissociation for sale and other things back there. So come see me after.
We've got about 25 minutes left, and I'm sure that you all are burning with questions to ask. I could stand up here all day and just be like, can you expand on that? Can you talk about that more? But I want to give you all the opportunity to ask some questions. Sarah, where are you? She had to go. Got it. So, Molly is going to walk the mic around. Does anybody have questions? Over here.
Hello, I'm Kelsey. I'm an attorney. Thank you so much for being here. I had a question, especially you mentioned about kind of non-standard forms of trafficking from the mainstream media. I work with clients who've experienced forced and child marriage and familial trafficking. Sure. And I have exactly this issue, especially with law enforcement. I think it also comes from a form of white supremacy. They are really focused on African-American pimps and guerrilla pimps. And a white father who traffics his daughter, or an Orthodox Jewish father who forces his child into marriage, trying to even get them to apply the state trafficking law has been really, really challenging. I'm in New Jersey, but I've done this work in PA as well, and it's been really a challenge. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to your experience as survivors telling those stories, and how we, your advocates and lawyers and law enforcement, how we can do a better job of servicing those stories.
Chris, can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think that it really starts in including this, the family trafficking piece whenever we're doing this work, right? If we're speaking about it, we're not a survivor ourselves, we bring that forward. There's also family trafficking, you know what I mean? However we can be connecting and bringing this forward in all the different ways that we do this work, whether you're a survivor or not. There was a study that I think came out of Missouri. Is anyone familiar with this? A few years ago, and they found that the vast majority of the children that they interviewed were used by family members. You were used in a familial trafficking system that was organized. They went to school, they went to church, they went to synagogue, they played sports and all of these different things, and their family members were doing this, and they were still sort of like, quote unquote, I hate this word, functioning member, right? Anyway, so like more because this culture responds to studies, and something is possibly real if you've studied it, right? I do think that there needs to be more writing and more studying and more speaking about this issue, bringing forward survivors who are in places where they can. I know tons and tons of survivors, but most of them don't talk about it publicly, right? But it goes to racism. But it also goes to, shall I say, heterosexism and the nuclear family, right? And all of these pieces are a part of that, right? And the protection of that, like the implicit protection of that. You're not gonna, I'm gonna go after the African American pimp, who is doing this in this way via, online or on the street or whatever. But I'm certainly not gonna go after the white family structure and challenge that in any way, shape, or form, and bring forward those abuses. And I do think that the more that we do this work, we're going to find, like every other form of sexual violence, that this is probably more than 50% happening from family members, right? The whole stranger danger thing it still applies to trafficking and prostitution, and we have to break through that. And I come talk to me, because I'd be happy to go on more about that.
Anybody else have a question? Over here. Molly, you're going to get a workout. Okay, you've got one.
Hey, y'all. Okay, so I know we talk in our circles a little bit about this, but there's a few men here. What would you say as survivor leaders is a way for men to get involved with this movement, specifically nonprofits, in an appropriate way, so they can be a part of the solution versus, in a way that's meaningful and respectful to survivors? What would you say to that?
Okay, we are really trying to put together a male ally, a group of men that will step up to the plate. I will tell you what I have been, I'm clear, no one has the right to buy or sell people, right? I am a true believer that in this movement, if white men do not step up to the plate and tell other privileged white men that it is not okay to buy people, we'll still have a problem. They don't really listen to us, right? And I think a lot of that, being someone that's in the life, I think a lot of that comes from, if someone bought me, I didn't go crying, oh my God, I have to give my money to a pimp, I always had to make them believe I was into them and I'm glad to see you, right? So I can kind of understand where they get the message, but she likes me. It is a victimless crime, right? Every time she sees me, she's happy. I just want your money, right? I always think of being in life, I probably could have got an Academy Award, right? Because what these men didn't understand, that after I left them, my attempt was to scrub them off of me. I was so disgusted. And so, I have to say this, I do believe that men need to step up to the plate, but here's the other piece, and some people might get a little upset with me when I say this, but my goal is to really make a difference. I think we have a problem with white males or men stepping up to the plate because they get bashed a lot. You're a creep, you're a buyer, right? So I feel like when men, no seriously, when men keep hearing us, let's keep it real, this movement is like female-led, and most females are calling them creeps, right? And no, I said this to my board members who was like, oh, he's a creep, right? I like to tell you every guy I met was a creep, but I did meet some nice, I really did, right? I think first we have to get our language correct when trying to, and I don't want to use the term recruit men, but to get men on board. I think we have to really get together and reframe our language, because I think if I was a man and I sat in a room of women who are trying to get me to stand up for their cause, but all I hear them do is bash men, it might be hard for me to want to be a part of that. So for me, that's just recently, because the bottom line, some of the men who come up to the plate, some of them are probably former buyers, right? Might not buy anymore, realize their mistake, want to step forward, but damn it, those women are talking about me so bad. No, I'm serious. So we have to figure out, the bottom line is, I think we're playing a part in men not stepping up. And so ladies, we have to figure out a respectful way, because I love for a man to step up to the plate, just like I could talk about where I came from. I'd like to see, like if we get our language in order, we might get that quite a few white males who were buyers who will come to the plate and talk about that, their part in it, and want to make a difference. But if we keep saying they suck, they're creeps, no one's going to step up to the plate. And again, I still stand by, no one has a right to buy or sell people.
Over the years, there's been men's programs that have developed to work on this issue and to get their voices out to say that yes, this is violence against women. But I believe, just like with the women, we can't have women coming up here that are not healed. They have to be healed. So if they are a buyer or what have you, they have to be healed. They have to understand their impact on women in this this issue. But there are, like I say, Breaking Free now. They have a program called Breaking Free Men. And I mean, we have to work together. I agree with Audrey. Women cannot end this by ourselves. This is going to take men and women. But there really are a lot of men that are out there, I believe, that really do see this as an issue that has to be addressed. Because they have daughters, wives. This is affecting them directly. And they can't ever say that, hey, it's never going to happen to me, so I can just keep my mouth shut. Because prostitution is no respecter of people. It doesn't matter if you're I've worked with women, young women whose parents are politicians. Whose parents have big money. It doesn't matter who you are.
Right.
It can touch you. And so this is really something that men have to open their ears, and they have to get bold, is what it is. Those that aren't out there and they know they're not, they just have to start saying no to some of the jokes they hear about women. They have to say no to, yeah, look at her, let's go see this. No, it's just not all right. Think of her as your daughter or something, as your niece, as your wife.
Right.
We just need men that will take that stand, because there's a lot of them out there that don't buy. But they're not saying anything. They might not agree with it, they're just not saying anything. And they just have to get bold enough to say, enough is enough. We have to stop this, we have to end it.
Molly, I think there's a question over here. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you all for sharing your stories. I wanted to know, personally, what led you out of the life? There's people, there's organizations that are there and put in place to try to help and be a resource. But I hear that there's sometimes people who are in life, they yo-yo in and out of life. But for you all, what was that driving factor that actually led you out? And how can people who are trying to lead you out, or what should we know about how to lead people out of life in your experience?
That's a big one. I'll thank you for that question. That's a really great question. I think each one of us here up on this platform right now, and I think the survivors in the audience, the survivors that you'll hear from throughout this whole thing, each one of us are going to have a different thing to say to that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that, prostitution and commercial sexual exploitation, trafficking, is not a singular problem. It's a culmination of problems. It's a culmination of traumas in each one of our lives. That tipping point, as it were, looks different for all of us. And one of the biggest reasons for that is it looks different depending upon what time and place you're in. Prostitution in Seattle today does not look like prostitution looked, over a decade ago when I got out of the life. And it doesn't look the way it looked in Minnesota when Vanita got out, or in Boston when Audrey got out. it's very different. I mean, for me, I literally had like a freaking mental, emotional breakdown, done, check myself in and figure this out. And a lot of that was because I was being sold this idea of this kind of neoliberalism, capitalistic idea of what this sex as work, it's empowering, you should be empowered, why aren't you empowered? And if you're not empowered, there's something wrong with you. And that was what really drove me, because my mind was like really having a hard time understanding, like, why? But I want to, like Audrey said, scrub my skin of this every time. So I'm supposed to find this empowerment. I think women today are especially in an awful situation for this, because on one hand, they're being sold their own slow suicides and being told it's empowerment. And on the other hand, they're literally going and looking and seeing that it is going to be a suicide, because that is essentially what it is you're suiciding your soul. And so it's one of those things where we need to, for each one of us, it is going to be different. We're each individuals here. I mean, for me, it literally took a breakdown. And there were very few services that I knew of. Ops in Seattle was not around when I got out. I got out thankfully to my white privilege, to be very honest with you. I had a family to return to. You know, I had a home, I had people I could go to. And truthfully, most women in prostitution don't look like me, and they don't have that privilege. So we need to be there as service providers to be able to provide that to them. Yeah, please.
I would say that my answer to that is books. That's what got me out, is books, because I was a little girl who wanted to get away from my parents. I wanted to go elsewhere. I'm the opposite of what I hear everybody talking about at these conferences, at least in Minnesota, where they're like, no kids ever want to leave their parents, they love their parents, and blah, blah, blah. If a real option had come for me, I would have been gone. I didn't want anything to do with them. I very much, my father was extremely brutal, and I hated him. I never had any love for him, and I hated him, and I wanted him to be gone so that my mom and I could live in peace. And I was very clear about that at a very, very young age, for whatever reason. But it was books that saved me, and in particular, in the beginning, Andrea Dworkin's books. And that was back in the day when we had, remember those things called books, and like they were like painted and peel them. We actually sat for a couple of hours and read the same thing and didn't scroll through the screen. Yeah, so, and of course books are ideas, and books are ultimately stories, right? And stories save lives. And books save lives. I guess the online stuff does too. But that is leading me to say that Shay and I are co-editing an anthology, and we want your writing, whoever you are. We want your writing, because that is one way that people can find themselves, is through other people's stories and challenging these ideas, like what we're talking about, what is being sold in our society right now to girls and boys. So anyway, we have that. Come see me, because Shay's going to be like really crazy busy. But come see me.
We did make that flyer. I can print that flyer.
Yeah, and we'll have a flyer for you, because really, like, this is an opportunity for you to be heard and for us to start to set the course for what we want to see 5, 10, 15 years out in doing this work, and you are the ones that we need.
I just want to say something real quick to what costs to me after working with women for 30 years. What I see women get out when they hit rock bottom. They hit rock bottom. They've been to jail, they've been to prison, they've been strung out on drugs. They've just lost their way, period. They don't know which way to turn, left, right, up, down. I don't know who I am. They're at their bottom, and they say they just give up on life, and they want somebody to help them. Those are the main ones that I hear, that I see, and that I've worked with over the years.
And just to piggyback off that, for me, it was just that. It was drugs that brought me to my knees. We didn't have programs. When I was in life, there were none of this stuff we're doing existed. It was a crime. Children were being arrested, doing time, the whole 9 yards. So for me, you know, I always sometimes say, thank God I'm not promoting substance abuse at all. But, you know, a lot of times I'm like, thank God for substances, right? They destroyed me, but at the same time, they saved my life. That's where I had to go to get help. And I remember going into my first treatment center when I was 20, and then my last one when I was 30, and a few in between. And I remember they would keep telling me the same thing: stay away from people, places, and things. You can't go back to that. You're gonna get high again. And finally, as you said, everything that they told me when I was 20 years old, my first detox, had happened to me, that they told me would happen to me. So when I went in at 30, I had hit rock bottom. And now I'm open. Yep, I don't know how to live, and somebody please help me. And so for me, I had to go to a drug treatment facility for that.
Sister Terry, do you have a question?
It's kind of a practical question. We have a presidential candidate who seems to be espousing the idea of decriminalizing prostitution. And I'm just wondering, is there some concerted effort from organizations like the Institute and the women who are sitting at the table coming together to have some kind of an impact in dissuading that candidate from thinking that way, based on what I'm hearing? Or do you have any suggestions as to what we can do?
So I just want everybody to understand that decriminalization means different things to different people. And I advocate for decriminalization of the individual who could be charged with the crime of selling sex or being sold for sex prostitution. We've written extensively on the Nordic model and why decriminalizing that particular crime, prostitution, is really critical. Sister, what I believe you're talking about is decriminalization, meaning the entire industry. So for those of you who aren't nuanced, and I don't want to assume everyone in the room is, that particular presidential candidate is talking about decriminalization, meaning the entire industry, including traffickers and the consumers. Okay, so I'll let you guys answer that question, but I just wanted to give that background. Sorry.
Can I just ask for a little clarification? Are we talking presidential candidate, like as in U.S. or
Yes.
like the school?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's like everything. You know, hey, it's the thing. Sorry. Dear God, no, please don't do that. That's like one of the things that I always, I mean, like Shay is talking about, there is another way. And the problem is people see this as a very black and white issue. They're like, oh, well, you need to criminalize the whole thing, or you need to decriminalize the whole thing. And it's like, no, there is a broad spectrum of understanding here. I think there are a lot of, I think your question was very specifically around things like movements and concerted efforts and coming togethers. Yes, I do think there are quite a few of those things. Do I think we, you know, I always like to say that we are a very tired, broken, battered movement sometimes, because we are doing the work. I look at the pro-sexist work lobby and I'm like, of course you have time to do this. You have the money of the patriarchal elements that are contributing to the problem. You have the porn money. You have the prostitution money. You have the trafficking money. Of course they have the money and the time to fly you around the country and be little mouthpieces. That's great. I do not have time for that because my office is in the same spot as a drop-in center. And so is Benita's, and so is Chris's, and so is Audrey's. And so is everybody else here, because we are working to help women, period. Which means, do we always have time to do both things? No. And that's really, really hard. So we need to be able to do both things. We need to push each other forward. And I think that Shay's CSE Institute does an amazing job of bringing people together, collaborating, having these conversations. I think World Without Exploitation does a great job. I think there are a lot of other organizations across the country that are trying to push this forward. But I think we do need to do a lot of educating. I think we need to do a lot of educating because, as Shay just demonstrated, people don't know there's another option out there. And we need to be those people that are educating them. You've been doing this work forever, though I'd love to hear what you have to say, what you think the movement is like right now.
Well, There are, you know, like you say, worldly, there's agencies that are out there that are really working at that, looking at that politically, you know, and there's work being done in Minnesota on this issue as well, but there's, I mean, it's just not easy because you have so many voices saying so many things. So, but there are people that are really working on it and looking at it, and I guess for myself, I myself am trying to dissect it, because if we just remove, we don't want the women to be arrested and held accountable, what does that mean to them?
Right.
Because I've heard so many women over the years say, if I hadn't gone to jail, I would have never got out. I'd have never got clean. I'd have never, because you can't think when you're in that life. You're running, you're constantly moving, things are happening to you. You wish somebody would come and just, hey, get a hold of yourself, you know? So I mean, I'm just dissecting it myself and really thinking about it, because some of it sounds really wonderful. And then there's that other part. I don't want her to just die out. You know, and that's a reality of what this life can do to you if nobody ever is able to help you to get out. So
I think that's actually a really quick, just want to push on that. That's super important. I mean, what Benita just said is we don't want you to die out there. And that's the reality. One of the problems that I have seen with the larger movement to doing demand reduction is that it focuses only on demand reduction, and it doesn't bring the survivor services voice in forward. So when things happen,
You have to do both.
You have to. I mean, you cannot, if you're just going to do this prevention work, what happens to the women that are right in life right now? Nothing. And they are going to die. And the reality is when things like Backpage come down, okay, that is a great thing. I'm happy about that. The problem is, though, is that we didn't do anything to bolster our services. So we suddenly have this influx of women who are moving from online to the streets in Seattle and nothing to do. We cannot help all of them. And so now what are we going to do? So we have to do both. That is my one major critique about the demand reduction movement, is it doesn't focus on both.
And if I can just quickly say that there's a report called The Garden of Truth, the Prostitution and Trafficking of Native Women. And I know some of you have heard of that. It's available online. And I was one of the researchers for that, and I also did another research project focusing on Native women being trafficked on ships in the Duluth Harbor, Duluth, Minnesota. And I like doing the quote-unquote research because it's an opportunity to open those doors so that those women are at the table, even though they can't physically be there with us. They're at the table through the quotations and through the research. And speaking from the Native women's perspective in Minnesota, is that they're just like, there's no way for me to get out. There's nowhere for me to turn. Any of the systems that are supposed to help them put them further back into this system of chattel slavery. And we just have to be mindful of how many women and kids are trapped in these situations and have absolutely no way to get out when we're talking about doing the demand work, and there's no services for them. There's just simply no services. So I just want to bring that forward because it's often portrayed as we know, as a choice, or once they get there, they'll make that decision to reach out and get help and help themselves. But for many of the women, there's nowhere for them to turn.
Right. So we are over time, and 3 of these women on this panel right now are going to be teaching their own workshops next. I'm really sorry about that. I really am. What, you 3 have to now leave and go talk for a whole other time. 3 of you. So if you guys can see, you 4 choices for the next panel, or excuse me, for your next workshop to attend. They are all on the lower level. You can take the stairs down or you can take the elevator down. So 15 minutes and they'll be up and ready to go for the next workshops. Thank you, everyone.